All right. Does it really work well? Yes, okay, good. Welcome everybody to this session on supervision and early career researchers. We have this a program with 4 presentations, and I will quickly start to give the floor to Tamarinde Haven, who comes from the fertile Dutch nest of research integrity researchers, right? Who has been in Aarhus and Virginia and Berlin, probably, and is now an assistant professor in Tilburg. Tamarinde, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted I can kick off this particular session. And well, hopefully my slides will be put up in a minute. I'm one of those people that can sometimes give the clue away already at the beginning of a story. And I'm hoping that at the end you'll get it and it will make sense to you. So I'm very much interested in responsible supervision of PhD candidates. How does this work and how do we get a sort of responsible relationship? And I'm sure you know of many quotes that start with "it takes two." And I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll be actually persuaded that it does take 2 flints to start a fire. When I embarked on this project of trying to get a better grasp of responsible supervision, it was not that there was nothing out there yet. There's no consensus definition, but a couple of things we knew and we saw resurface are summarized on this slide. There's the idea that the supervisor should be a responsible role model, right? Which can be very simple things, from also sharing your own data, if this is something that you advocate your PhD candidates to do. A supervisor should also be able to, have discussions about responsible research practices, encourage those, because supervisors aren't always, the best equipped to give the good example, right? Sometimes they're no longer really standing with their feet in the clay or in the lab. They may have moved to sort of more strategic positions, but they can nevertheless encourage responsible research practices. And finally, there's the idea that the supervisor possesses the kind of interpersonal skills necessary to make for a psychologically safe climate, where also if things go wrong or there are dilemmas in research, that there is a perception that those can be discussed and raised, and if mistakes have been made, that they can be acknowledged and potentially fixed. Just earlier this year, this wonderful scoping review came out by Daniel Pizzolato and Chris Diederichs that showcased that the work in this area is growing. There were 35 studies in their review, and it really shows that our field is also, I think, in a way, maturing and expanding. But a couple of things struck me. The first is that in almost all of their studies, they only engaged with one of the 2 parties. So they either just spoke with supervisors or they spoke with PhD candidates. And despite the fact that, this is also something we see reflected in the ALEA code, that we all think very fondly of the supervisor having to be the role model, having to give the good example, there's virtually no empirical evidence that this role modeling happens, how it works, has it ever been examined? And lastly, there exists, at this point at least, no validated measurement instruments to get a sense of, okay, if we then do roll out any interventions on improving supervision, do they have any sort of effect? Do we get better supervisors? What I wanted to know when embarking on this project was, okay, but what then is responsible supervision in practice, right? What are the sort of practice and procedures that supervisors can engage in to promote responsible conduct of research among their PhD candidates? And what kind of actions and behaviors can they do to create a working climate that's characterized by both psychological safety and organizational trust? And one of the studies in which I tried to investigate this consisted of focus groups. I distinguish researchers from different disciplinary fields, so from the biomedical sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, the natural sciences, and also the technical sciences. And from those, I always did focus groups with PhD candidates and supervisors. So I always included 2 parties, not together, because things always tend to get a little bit tense then when it comes to these sort of topics. But we did I did use a very similar moderator guide so that both parties at least provided their reflections and perceptions on these topics. And I'm currently in the process of bringing those results together. And for the sake of time, I'm only going to highlight one or two results to these research questions, because I'm mostly going to try to show you why I think it takes two flints to start a fire and what the sort of interdependencies between these topics have taught me when doing this research. I distinguish beyond disciplinary fields and also trying to account for the still variety, epistemic and methodological, within these kind of disciplinary fields, right? So for example, for the social sciences, I did focus groups with both quantitative researchers and a group of qualitative researchers, because the sort of criteria for what makes good research can really be substantially different. And similarly for these other groups. At this point, I've spoken to 61 researchers, and I still have 3 focus groups lined up. So this is my also exclamation to you that this is work in progress, and we may still see it shift a little bit when the final groups have also been done. What I found when it came to this role modeling, this sort of implicit way of trying to be a good supervisor and of trying to create a good supervisory relationship, was that the things that, you know, supervisors were preoccupied with, but also PhD candidates, through more of this way of showing by doing, one of them at least that surfaced in different ways in different disciplines had to do with sort of responsible handling of data. And I have this quote from a PhD candidate from the sort of more quantitative social sciences, who is reflecting on the fact that, you know, she knows that this is something you know, that her supervisor has talked about, you know, good research data management. But she doesn't still really know what it entails and what she should do in practice. And she is telling her fellow students here that, you know, and many people here in this focus group also agreed, they changed their strategy a billion times because there clearly hasn't been much explicit discussion among, you know, the particular people in this supervisory team. An example from the other side of the coin, when it came to sort of having more explicit discussion about particular research practices, and sometimes even the supervisors instructing the students, or vice versa for that matter, had to do with assuring the correct analyses. And this is a quote from a professor in more sort of clinical and epidemiological research, who is reflecting on the fact that also through experience, he had learned that it's very important, in particular if you do large consortia research and you're testing all of these different models at once, that you agree as a collective and you involve the PhD candidate in this. When are we going to say it was successful versus when not? And I found many, many more profoundly important topics. And I hope in a few months down the line to also present you the sort of more nuanced version where you can see which sort of topics stuck out more for particular disciplines versus others. But all of these on the slide are things that actually surfaced in one way or another in the kind of discussions we were having. When it came to trying to get them to talk and reflect on how do we then create this sort of safe and trusting relationship, one strategy that both supervisors and candidates recognized was that of trying to at the same time challenge and on the other hand, support, and how this can be in tension. And this is a quote from, oh, it fell off the slide, I'm sorry. This is a quote from a supervisor in humanities, reflecting on the fact that sometimes students almost want you to make the difficult decision for them, and about how he has taken a step back and he has learned that a more fruitful approach here may be that instead of saying, this is it, saying, okay, we'll meet next time. You come up with 3 arguments for position A, and you come up with 3 arguments for position B, and we discuss them together. I'm here to support you, but I'm also here to challenge you in making your own decisions. And, you know, when doing all of this, and you can see again the sort of other results that we found here, what became evident to me was something I had initially overlooked when embarking on this research, which was something that my participants kept on telling me again and again. You can't have one without the other. You need both an active PhD candidate, you need an active supervisor. You should focus much more on the sort of collaboration and the mutual effort that these parties put in. And also, you can't just have only the explicit part all well done, and we talk about good research and we try to collectively make together decisions about good research. But then when I observe what you do in practice, it's not what we discussed. And similarly, if we don't have a climate together where I feel safe and supported, the other things can be all beautiful, but they simply don't work. And I actually think, continuing on the fire metaphor, that we see something similar when it comes to fire. So some of you may be familiar with the fire triangle. There are 3 elements that you always need to make fire. The first is the fuel, which could be, you know, solids, woods, paper, everything, something that can burn. This is sometimes a little bit counterintuitive to people, but we always need a little bit of heat as well. And this can, you know, sort of be from the sun, from hot surfaces. And finally, we need, and I put it, oxidizing agents here. Most of you know oxygen, of course, but technically seen in the lab, you can use other oxidizers to make a fire. And if you remove either of these elements, the fire is going to die out. And I think something similar here applies to when you actually want to get responsible research. Because my main focus for, you know, embarking on this journey on investigating responsible supervision was because I care about responsible research. And I think we need 2 people, and they need to be focused on all of these 3 different kind of things in their own way, which is why I put all of the different themes on the slide, because the exact combination may be different, right? We can make fire using wood, maybe something from the sun and oxygen, but there are many other different combinations possible. But I think we always need to start, just like we always need to start with fuel, from this safe and trusting relationship. And then, and this is what a lot of us focus on right now, we do need both of our supervisors and students to be knowledgeable and skilled when it comes to doing responsible research, and when it comes to, you know, having the tools to even discuss that and to know and be able to defer what is a correct analysis here versus what is not. But it's all not going to work if we don't also bring the implicit part to the table. We can have a beautiful trusting relationship. We can have both knowledge about responsible conduct of research, but if we don't also practice it, that's still not really the responsible research that's going to come out of this. And with that, I welcome your questions and thoughts on this metaphor. And I want to say one more thing. The fire I have in mind is indeed the fire as Louisa Alcott, the author of this quote, described, which is the cozy, crackling fire that you have in the back of your room and that slowly warms up the room. I'm not talking about forest fires. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamarinde. I'm happy she will be eager to take any questions. Yeah, Markus? Please introduce yourself whenever you have a question, who you are.
Thanks. So my name is Markus Seethaler. I'm from the Austrian Ombuds Office, Student Ombuds Office. We'll speak next, right after you. I really like the safe and trusting relationship as a basis for PhD supervising. I was thinking at first, well, that's a good point then that supervisors should really think about who they want to supervise and maybe be really picky in some cases, only if they have the impression that there can be a safe and trusting relationship. But then I was thinking, well, in many cases, it might start with a safe and trusting relationship, but then something might go wrong. So I guess it's also quite an effort to keep this up. And do you have some ideas on what's the most important in preserving this relationship?
I think it's an excellent point. And I think just like fire, it needs to be regularly tended after. The most natural way of tending after such a thing, which is not on the slide, but very implicit in my talk, is expectation management. And I think it's something that we often feel perhaps we're too good for, or it's all going well, right? No issues. But regular expectation management there is really the sort of thing to see, is this fire still burning happily? Is our relationship still flourishing?
Thank you, Tamarinde, for this really interesting project presentation. So my name is Andra Schromm. I'm from the Research Center Borstel and coordinator for good scientific practice at our institute. I would be interested to know how you selected your participants. So my question is, are these specifically engaged supervisors or students, or is this just random? And how does this affect your data?
Thank you. They are engaged in a sense that it was my criterion that they at this point had to be actively supervising, and they had to be either associate or full professor. So the supervisors that are in my sample are not sort of early supervisors on the level of assistant professor or postdoc. No, I actually wanted to target the relatively senior and established people because I feel we don't target them enough, but that's between you and me. And similarly, you know, for the students that they actually at least had to work and research for 3 days per week, etc. My main recruitment has focused on reaching out to both PhD coordinators, graduate schools, and those sort of policy advisors to ask to think along with me who might be able to provide interesting perspectives on this topic. That is a black box. And I'm very well aware of that. I've also tried to always supplement it with randomly inviting people that would meet the sort of overall criteria that I stipulated to be included, because I wanted to add some extra diversity to the mix. And of course, I've always tried to take into account national, international, gender, and those sort of things. But especially the sort of gateway, which has really helped me, and I think also given me insight into how things are going at a local organization, is ultimately a black box I cannot count for.
Hello, I'm Thierry. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for a study that looks both at the points of view of supervisors and doctoral candidates. We need more of those. I just wondered if you could elaborate on why you said that we need implicit. I might have misunderstood something that you said, but it seems to me that the elements that you mentioned in the implicit are things that are implicit at the beginning, but really need to become explicit in order to avoid misunderstandings and so on. So maybe I misunderstood, but could you elaborate on that?
Thank you for your question. You didn't misunderstand me at all. And it's actually also some of the feedback we sometimes had when doing these focus group discussions, right? That people realized, oh, this is something I actually do much more implicitly. Or, you know, my supervisor, we never so much talked about it, but I sort of see him, her, or them do this all the time. There are two things I want to say to that. One is, it's good to make things explicit, right? But it's never going to be perfect. And my reason for saying that this is a necessary component is we can have explicit discussions about all of these topics all you want, right? We can talk about, I'll take the ethical sensitivity because I haven't spoken about it. We can have explicit discussions about it. But if it's not also something that we implicitly convey in the research we do on a day-to-day basis, those discussions are beautiful, but they're not going to be of any real effect.
Thank you. I have been informed that there is a question online. Is that true? Rita Santos, there you go.
Hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation. Very good. I'm Rita Santos. I'm currently European Network for Research for Academic Integrity Executive Director. And my question, did you find difference between international students and the supervision and supervisors? Were there any like PhD students needing more support from the supervisors? Can you please elaborate on that? If you found this difference?
Thank you. I can only report on this sort of anecdotally because it hasn't been my main focus. And you may find sort of two things, right? One is that if there are international students and it didn't work in that country before, I did focus groups in both the Netherlands and Denmark, then inevitably they come with expectations that mimic the environment where they receive the rest of their education. And that can actually be slightly different. So there's a way in which you would almost need more of that expectation management at an early phase to make sure we're going well informed into this project together. When it comes to needing more supervision, I don't know if that's a fair judgment here to make. And other than that, I have to stay silent on the answer.
All right, and we have one final question.
What's the future there?
What I'm hoping to see in a current movement that is, I think, heavily fueled by debates in the Netherlands, but also expanding, is the recognition and rewards movement, where part of the way in which we want to recognize what scientists have been doing is also through leadership. And I see a great synthesis between responsible supervision and leadership. And I'm hoping, which is going to be the next step in my own work still, to ultimately use these results to build something more of a tailored measurement instruments for responsible supervision that would use both input from the PhD candidates as well as the supervisors. And I'm hoping that by developing those sort of tools and embedding them within the sort of way in which we enable academic careers, that is going to lead to a more sustainable future where people hopefully receive more responsible supervision.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Thierry. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you some feedback that we got from doctoral supervisors training in France. So just briefly, I represent a training firm which is specialized, as you said, in human resources management. And we do trainings which include research integrity and doctoral supervision towards doctoral candidates and supervisors, of course. The data I'm going to use today is mainly feedback that we got from our trainings during exchanges during trainings. So there were no formal interviews, no surveys, no numbers, nothing really quantitative and so on. And so it's feedback, also feedback collected through written synthesis from the trainers after each training and through the evaluation surveys that we sent to the trainees after the training. I'm going to use data from feedback that we got from doctoral supervisors training, from doctoral researchers training dedicated to research integrity, and also a bit from feedback sessions 4 to 6 months after an initial training where we exchange with people. So I'm going to talk about 3 things: the need to address research integrity during the supervisors training. I'm going to talk about the problems with research integrity trainings according to the doctoral researchers. And I'm going to talk to you about feedback that we get from the doctoral supervisors themselves. So why do we need to address RI in the trainings? Well, first of all, in France, at least, only a few organizations made those trainings mandatory for supervisors. And most supervisors do not know that there are resources available for them. So that means that actually very few supervisors are trained or know really something about RI. When there are trainings, most of those trainings broach the subject from the fraud angle, from the FFP, okay? The other aspects are rarely talked about, and that means that there is a great lack of awareness, especially regarding the emerging issues, like, for instance, open science. Most supervisors we talked with, they have no idea what open science is or what it means concretely, okay? And the trainings that we talked with the supervisors, they told us that they lack practical advice on how to address research integrity with the doctoral researchers. That means that most of them, they only talked about the risks of getting caught if there is a problem, and not about the issues, the reasons why we need to address it, and so on. Most of the time, research integrity is not seen as an issue by the research supervisors. It was, in our experience, not once mentioned in the pre-training questionnaires. It is very rarely mentioned during the introductions of the trainings, where we talk about the expectations with regards to the trainings. And when it is because one of the supervisors had a fraud experience and this has questions about that. So as a synthesis, supervisors are rarely trained, at least in France. The trainings, when they exist, are mainly about fraud and plagiarism. They lack practical advice. And that all means that it is not an issue for supervisors. Second things, what are the problems with the existing trainings for doctoral researchers? So we talked with them during the trainings. First thing they said is there's a great difference between the theory that they hear about in trainings and the practice in labs. Nothing new under the sun here. I just gave you a few examples, but you can elaborate on that based on your own experience. Many of them also say that they feel trapped between the pressure to publish and the guidelines that they get in trainings, for instance. And of course, they very often mention that they don't have the power to change things, even if they do believe in the importance of research integrity. Maybe some of you know that in France, since 2016, trainings on research integrity are mandatory for doctoral researchers. But there again, based on the testimonies we got, most of them deal with fraud, and sometimes they specifically deal with plagiarism and nothing else. Okay. And there again, the angle most of the time is, here is what you risk if you get caught. Okay. There's no sense given to these principles. Other thing that the doctoral candidates told us, when RI is mentioned during doctoral school presentations, the introductions at the beginning of the year and so on, it's most of the time boring. It's seen as just yet another administrative information, so you don't really listen to it. It focuses on the mandatory aspect of the training. If you don't follow the training, you will not be allowed to defend your thesis. This is why you need to take an interest in research integrity. And a third of the doctoral researchers that we talked to felt like they were talked down to, like, you are young, and young people, they tend to cheat, so beware. Okay, of course, senior researchers, they never cheat, but young people, beware. So as a synthesis, the feedback we got from doctoral researchers, trainings are mainly about fraud, which is of course a problem. Trainings are hard to put into practice, and presentation back to doctoral schools are boring and or condescending. So last, what feedback did we get from the doctoral supervisors about transmitting these RI principles? So here I'm going to mainly use the data that we got from feedback sessions, okay? 4 to 6 months after a training session for supervisors, which included things about research integrity. We talk with supervisors and they tell us this works, this doesn't. We exchange and we get feedback from that, okay? So first thing that we got is, there again, nothing new under the sun, but one-on-one discussions work better. The doctoral supervisors who relied on the mandatory trainings or on the doctoral schools and so on, they were not satisfied with the practice of the supervisees, okay? But the ones who took the time to discuss it with their doctoral researchers, they report that the doctoral researchers are more interested in research integrity. They report that they question the practices in the team or in the lab and so on. And the last thing is, I think, very interesting. Those discussions with the doctoral researchers, they lead the supervisors to interesting questions. They think, oh, I never questioned that fact. That's very interesting. Second thing that we learned is that they feel like it's important to give sense to the research integrity principles and not to just say, this is what you risk if you get caught, or just do as you're told, or we always did like that, and so on. When they explain why those principles exist, they seem more content with the results. Like, this is one example that we got from the discussions. Very often, doctoral researchers, they do experiments, they tend to get data, and there's always some data which are outliers, okay? And when the doctoral researchers tend to say, okay, you know what, this is a measuring error, so let's remove that point from the data. When the supervisor answers, oh, no, we can't remove that data point, because if we get caught, we're going to have problems and so on. In that case, we fall back in the don't get caught problem. If they explain why we should not remove that point, like for instance, using the humility excuse, okay, we think it's a measuring error, but maybe it's not. Maybe if we publish the data as is and explain why we do not take this into account because we believe it's a measuring error, Maybe in 2 years, someone else is going to do the same experiment and find the same outlier. And maybe in 4 years, someone is going to do their PhD on what is happening here, okay? And so when they give sense to the principles, there again, the doctoral researchers tend to follow the principles more easily. And one additional thing that we got from the supervisors is that they feel like the system is, of course, not encouraging them to have responsible practices. They feel the pressure to reduce the duration. They feel the pressure to publish more papers. Of course, there again, nothing new. They feel the pressure of bibliometric evaluation, and we have this since the first day of the doctorate, because one of the first things that doctoral researchers hear when they get into PhD is you need to have at least that number of publications if you want to defend your thesis. And of course, in some fields, they are evaluated by the number of papers they write with their supervisors. So what did we get on the whole? One-on-one discussions seem to be more efficient. We need to give sense to our principles, and the systemic issues are, of course, still the main problem. So in conclusion, we see that doctoral supervisors, they play a central role, of course, in raising doctoral researchers' awareness of AI, so that the researchers themselves, they need to be convinced to change their practices, and one-on-one discussions work better for that. Research environment is, of course, essential, which means that senior researchers need to be aware of RI issues, and systemic pressure to publish remains, of course, a problem. Supervisors feel guilty if the supervisees do not publish enough, and the supervisees, they must choose between quality and quantity. So what recommendations do we get from all that? First of all, due to the lack of funding, mostly, it seems that most research integrity trainers in France are senior researchers who themselves are not specialized in research integrity. So what they say might not be in accordance with the literature about research integrity, okay? So I believe we need to provide trainings and or resources to those trainers, and or we need to create networks of said trainers where they don't already exist. It seems that currently mandatory trainings have little impact on practices. So that means we need to find incentives for research integrity trainings, and we need to mention research integrity in other kind of trainings. We know that training powerless researchers is pointless, so we need to provide trainings to the heads of teams, the heads of labs, and so on. And of course, we'd like to reduce the use of bibliometry in research evaluation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks a lot, Simon.
Thank you. So I'm Nicolas Eck. I'm working at Sorbonne University, and I'm actually since 3 years. That's why my question comes. I designed and I do a workshop for PhD students on research integrity. I restrict myself to life science students because if we mix all disciplines, it's getting a bit difficult. And so if I understood right, you ask PhD students their feedback on the training they got about research integrity. And you said that seems massively that it's the main concern are frauds and those things, which are the least interesting thing, of course, which usually I whip away in my workshop in the first 5 minutes. Truly. But my question was about the sampling. That is, you have how many universities, how many students? I mean, can you tell us whether they all follow the same MOOC and that's why they all have the same answer, or is it really because all the trainees, which are all the trainings, or I don't know to say, proposed in France are on that matter, or?
So about the sampling, I got through that very quickly at the beginning in one of the very first. Oh, thank you. It's the sample comes from several universities in France and several national organizations, as you can see on the map. I believe that there are some researchers that come, some PhD researchers that come from your university. That means that some of them actually followed the MOOC that I think you're thinking about, the one from University of Bordeaux. Some of them also mentioned that they have specific trainings with people talking to them in person and so on. So no, there was a variety of trainings that they talked about. Since I'm a pessimistic person, I mainly focused here on the negative feedback that we got. Of course, there also were doctoral candidates telling us we had a very good training, we had training about this and that, but it really wasn't a majority. Okay. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Thank you. Very interesting. So I have a question on one of your conclusions. You mentioned that mandatory training right now might have little impact on practice. I would say, based on what you said, it might even have the wrong impact. It might help to make this narrative or to rewrite this narrative that research integrity is something bad, that you get punished for it. So yeah, maybe the conclusion should be even a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I agree with you. So yeah, nothing much to answer there. I think we will agree on that.
Yeah, in France, this happened in a shock, right? There was nothing before, and then from one day to the other, this was mandatory all over the country.
Yeah, there wasn't much before 2016. So there were a few universities and institutions that were proactive and suggested trainings about that.
Yeah.
But all of those who were there in the morning, you heard Pierre Corvol, who was the author of the report in 2015 or 16 that said we really should have trainings about that. And well, thankfully he was heard on that subject, and there was quickly some regulations saying, okay, now it's mandatory. But yeah, it was a quick process. Now, of course, we're talking about public universities, which means that between the moment when it was mandatory and the moment when it was put in practice, there was some time still.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Mads Goriksen. I'm from University of Copenhagen. I just wanted to follow up on that comment before, because I think we actually have some data to show that. We published a study recently on not on PhD students, but on BA students, where we try to test whether they are sensitive to ethical issues in academic integrity and research integrity. And what we show is that if they've had training, they actually get worse.
Yeah.
And our hypothesis is exactly this, what you also described, that the training that they get is very focused on the very severe cases and drawing this black and white picture.
Yeah.
That it's either right or it's wrong, and there's no focus on the gray stuff. So I think there is actually empirical support for what you just said.
Yeah, and I think that's something we don't see only in with questions of research integrity. Like, for instance, I don't know if we have time for wide comments, but a few of my colleagues are trainers about equality in the professional workplace and so on. And they mentioned similar results with trainings about toxic behavior and sexual harassment and so on, that the people who were trained, they learned that, okay, so this is bad, which means that everything else, the things that they put in orange, okay, that's acceptable. Okay, and there were less reports about toxic behavior after the trainings because, well, okay, it's not that bad actually.
Any more questions? Then we're exactly on schedule to thank Simon again. And give the floor to Joeri Tijdink, also from the Netherlands. A research integrity researcher who has done a lot of things, psychiatrist by background, serving in the Netherlands second advice mechanism for cases, also a member of the Young Academy of the Netherlands. The floor is yours, Joeri, to talk about how to become a happy academic and mental health in academia.
Yes, thank you so much. Is this one working? Yes, also for the online audience. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. You want to say something? You have a question?
No, it is working, but if you walk all over the place, the camera will have difficulties following you. But you
Okay,
can.
we can check. I'll just check it. But I hope you allow me to walk a little bit because, well, I'm a little too tall. So we're going to talk about mental health in academia, and just you referred to that you're a pessimistic person, and I have one conflict of interest. I am an optimistic person. And that's also why the book that I wrote about how we can help early career researchers to become a happy academic is called The Happy Academic. So bear with me that sometimes I am a little bit too positive. However, we're going to talk about mental health in academia, and that is not so much a positive topic. We're going to discuss mental health in academia, factors that influence mental health, how can we improve mental health, and some take-home messages. So I start with an exercise, and I give you 1 minute for this. The question is, what makes you feel bad in academia? Just, I see a lot of early career researchers here, or early career higher education professionals. If you close your eyes for 1 minute, think of what makes you feel bad in academia. Okay, the first one is directly. That was not even 1 minute, what was 1 second. Pressure to publish. Okay, what else? Loneliness, yeah, okay. In the back? Yeah, also a very important one. That also makes me feel miserable sometimes. Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
Bad supervisors.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, definitely bad supervisors. Yeah. Those are definitely, yeah. Those are all very important, and we come back to this in a minute. But these are very good examples. So 2 months ago, Nature published like a staggering report on actually mental health, and they concluded in several surveys that they did among academics that the pressure is extremely high, and specifically for early career researchers. So they reported that almost 40% of researchers, early career researchers, have anxiety problems and have depressive symptoms. And this is not just a random survey, this is a conclusion of several surveys. And I think this is something we really have to worry about. It is it also that they divide between male and female and also minority groups, and that you see that in males it's about 35%, and in females it's over 40%, and in minority groups even higher. And I think this is something that we really should worry about, and we should also question ourselves, actually, why do we suffer? And I think the work that we do, so there are a multitude of factors, but the work that we do, and I always show this slide on when we talk about bad research practices and how difficult it is to follow all the steps in the scientific process. But it is also inherent on research, because it takes a long way, a long and winding, and also suffering road full of rejections and people that find something of your work that is not good to end up with a nice and positive publication. So it is partially inherent to our work, but that's not that's not the whole story. The whole story is also indeed the number one, lack of supervision or insufficient supervision. There's this publication pressure you already referred to, also the application pressure, the poor career opportunities for early career researchers, that you have so many tasks on your plate, the power relations we already discussed, the working hours, the unwritten rules about how you should behave in academia, that the work in academia never stops. It's day and night, weekends, when you can always work, which is good sometimes, but bad most of the times. The quantitative research assessment, Simon already alluded to, and the endless rejections that we're going to face in academia. So there are plenty of reasons. And if you look more closely to all those reasons, you see that all that I put in bold, these factors are actually not individual factors. We always tend to think that mental health and depression, anxiety is purely an individual problem. But in psychiatry and in all other fields, we know it is a systemic problem, not only caused by the individual, but it's caused also by the culture. And all these factors are really about cultural and systemic factors and not individual factors. And they're very hard to deal with. So, as I said, a healthy person. This is just from a psychiatric and also from a psychological perspective. A healthy person lives in a healthy environment, and we always thought that mental health was something individual. But now we know how important support system and environment actually play, and how much we actually need to take care of this. And this is the approach that we now also have on mental health disorders. It's not just biology, it's also psychology, it's also about coping skills, it's also about your past, and it's also very much about social context, about support, about culture, about traditions, about education. Why am I telling this on the Research Integrity Conference? I ask myself, and I'm not asking you, and I already know the answer. It is because if we are pressured, then we make more mistakes. And more mistakes is also inherently related to research integrity, of course, and maybe even to sloppy science. We, in my PhD, we try to investigate this with relating pressure to publish with research misconduct, of research misbehaviors, and there's a clear relation between them, which is also quite logical, right? Because we are not very different than other industries. For example, it's not without reason that, for example, in the aviation industry, that pilots, the pilots that are exhausted, are burned out, make more mistakes. And that's why they have clear regulations for pilots, right? And it's also with physicians, doctors. They make more mistakes on a patient level, patient decisions, when they are more burned out. So it's also logical. And that's why we have to take more attention to mental health in researchers. I already said this, that if for research integrity, but also for mental health, 3 important pillars play a pivotal role. You have the individual with misbehaviors, conflict of interest. You have the system of hyper-competition, recognition and rewards, quantitative assessment criteria. You have this culture of insufficient mentoring. We are really talking about a wicked problem, right? Because there are so many factors, and you want to have influence on so many factors, and you don't have that because you cannot change the system in one day. You cannot change a culture that easily, or you cannot change your supervisor, although we want to. That having said this, I think it's important to emphasize that not only mental health, but also research integrity is a wicked problem with so many layers and so many things involved, that we also have to really think, okay, what can we influence? I will come back to that in a minute. So to summarize, mental health in academia is under pressure. Poor mental health is related to making mistakes, and culture and support are essential elements of good mental health outcomes. So we have to, I'm looking at the time, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? Can we influence? And as I said, this wicked problem has so many layers and so many different elements that I think that you always should, if we talk about improving your own mental health, you always have to think like the Stoics, Zeno. This is a well, I'm not. It's a portrait of Zeno. He's one of the founders of the Stoicism, and the most important element of Stoicism is, of course, that change what you can change and accept what you cannot change. And I think this is something that can help early career researchers to navigate in this wild academic sphere, and to survive in this academic sphere, that you actually try to influence the things that you actually can influence. So as I briefly referred to the happy academic, and there some of the advices that are in there to survive and stay happy in academia are emphasized or highlighted. And I just want to take you with all the advices. I think we really have to stop romanticizing a career in academia. There was a hard nod there. I mean, it's not that romantic at all. It's a lot of suffering, to be honest. And I don't want to discourage you right now, because I'm also still in academia, and there's a lot of positive things, but it's also a hard suffering sphere that we have to navigate and have to learn how to navigate. I would also acknowledge the role of chance in procedures, in submissions, in proposals, in positions. There is so much chance in what we actually will achieve. It helps me to consider that the things that I achieved and I didn't achieve is really merely about luck than about my personal talents or something. No, it is more luck. I'm quite well, specifically with my talents, it's definitely luck. No, and also stop comparing yourself with others, because it's always greener on the other side, right? There's always a position higher. Well, yeah. Unless you're the king. Well, if you're when you're a bachelor student, you want to become a master student. When you want a master, you want to become a PhD student. When you're a PhD student, maybe a postdoc, assistant professor, maybe a associate professor. You can always compare, right? And then you're associate, then you want to become a full professor. When you're a full professor, you can become a dean. When you're a dean, you want to become a rector. When you're a rector, can become a minister. When you're a minister, then you cannot become a king. So the prime minister still, so it's always greener on the other side. Well, I don't think that being a prime minister is green, but it's always greener on the other side. And I really think that, except to a certain extent, the things that you cannot change is very important. One final thing before we round it off, is that I find it very important, and I really believe that you have to stop working with people who make you feel miserable. This sounds sometimes very difficult, but I really feel in academia that we should choose more the people that we want to work with. You can always embark on a research mission together with a person that you really like, or with a person that you really like collaborating with, and like these power positions with arrogant bosses that treat you bad. I mean, you can leave. Really, you can leave. Never forget that, and that you can change something there. So, given the time, one final remark is, of course, it's also possible, although that these practical advices and so on do not help enough. And it's very important to know that you always can seek for mental support from a psychologist or professional mental support. I think you should never underestimate how hard and bearing sometimes mental health problems are, and this 40% is staggeringly high, and we should really take that number into account when we talk with early career researchers, but also if you're supervising someone, that this is on your plate. It's not a responsibility as a supervisor, but it is something that you have to take into account, and that you can help people going or for support, that the support is actually, or the support structures are actually there. Before we stop, now I would like to ask you, what makes you feel good about your academia? What is great about academia? Just because I don't want to end very pessimistically. I can come with some, but what? Take a minute and think of what makes you feel good in academia. Okay, cool. Yeah. Definitely, yeah. Well, what I personally really like is working with smart people. That's also something, or conversing with smart people. It's great to be on these conferences and have these great conversations all the time. Yeah. Nothing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, but you cannot say it out loud. Well, you can. No. Yeah. It can give a big relief for sure. Yeah. Being independent. Yeah. Autonomy is very, very important as well. Yeah. Or independence is not the same as autonomy, but I translated it a little bit. Yeah. So can you explain? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So to great projects, but do so and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure you can so easily like separate things.
No, definitely. There's yeah. It has two sides of a coin, of course, right? Yeah. That's very good to highlight. Yeah. Saving the world. Who said it? Yeah. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Yeah. That you have the feeling of saving the world, right? Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. Yeah. It's also megaloman to think of megalomania, it's called, to think that we can actually save the world. But I know what you mean. You know what you mean. I know the feeling. Stupid feeling, but it's great. Yeah. Thanks. Anyone? Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for your attention, and happy to discuss. Yeah.
Thanks, Joeri. So the questions from the floor. We have some time.
I am Hugh Desmond from Leibniz University of Hanover. Many thanks, Joeri. Very interesting talk. Two questions. Maybe first one, a suggestion. You were kind of wondering about the connection between mental health and research integrity. Of course, there's like an older meaning of ethics as, concerning how to lead the good life. And for Aristotle, of course, living ethically entailed, per definition, happiness, flourishing, and so on. And so, if you kind of think about the logical implications of this, well, it would be kind of interesting. There would be this kind of reconceptualization of what research integrity would mean, as to include some of the metrics we associate with well-being, which arguably doesn't really seem to be the case. I mean, if you're honest or reliable or scrupulous, whatever, doesn't really seem to have much to do with some of the things you talked about. So, but anyway, that would be just one suggestion. And the question, it's very interesting because the past years, suddenly mental health is everywhere. You mentioned, you referred to that paper in Nature, but it's kind of, I mean, it's always been there, but it seems, I mean, the attention for it has really increased exponentially. And I'm beginning to have somewhat ambivalent feelings about this trend because, mental health is about flourishing and well-being, but I see also a tendency, mental health is also a jurisdiction for mental health professionals. And so what you're beginning to see is also that institutions say, employees, young researchers have mental health problems. Well, why don't you go see a mental health professional and they'll sort you out? And so, you see where I'm going with this, then mental health becomes kind of a tool to kind of do business as usual, to maybe change people's expectations, but not necessarily the reality of research.
And what is the question?
Well, the question is that this is, one would say, perhaps not really what is at stake, right? When you're concerned with mental health, right? You're concerned with genuine well-being and flourishing of researchers. That is not necessarily how it's being used in a wider kind of social context, right? So the original motivations for caring about mental health, well, it's not necessarily how it's being implemented in institutions. I mean, not necessarily, right? I mean, I don't want to be too negative or take away from the positive energy of the talk, but so there's two senses of mental health: one, genuine mental health, and the other as kind of a label for coping strategies, maybe, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think now I understand your point. I mean, I think you make important. There's a big difference if you, from a psychiatric perspective, talking about psychiatric disorders, then you see actually hardly any trend towards more psychiatric disorders in society. So that is completely different than when we talk about like mental well-being, or burnout, for example, that the burnout levels are higher, and it has several reasons. We can dive into the cultural reason, we can dive into the systemic reason, we can dive into the individual reasons. The one thing that is clear, though, is that people are talking about it, while 20 years ago it was more of a forbidden subject whatsoever. So that is actually a big difference, that people are talking about it. And of course, that's good, because I think it can really help you to share instead of not sharing your feelings towards your mental health with others. So I think that's very important. On the other hand, we also need to have these concerns, because there are just not enough psychologists to actually go to provide mental health support for everyone in the world, or everyone in academia. So that's also not the goal. I think that we really have to distinguish between those two. But I also really would like to encourage that sharing and caring for yourself and for others is something new in society, and something also that we should adopt in academia as well, because it prevents. The prevention element is very important there, that you don't want people to really develop a psychiatric disorder.
Chris Dierks, Leuven University, Belgium. I agree with the difficulties young researchers are facing. Let's say I've gone through it too, and I'm not yet first minister, so prime minister, so still a long way of suffering to go. When I hear that you see, for some parts, you refer to pilots, young medical professionals. When I listen to my kids and their friends, who are, let's say, young, ambitious, smart professionals, but not in academia, would it be too strong to say that it is not only, or not first of all, a problem of academia, but a problem how society, industry, academia, and other contexts deal with young professionals?
Yeah, well, that's what you would think. And on the one hand, it's true, because that's the society in general that is changing. On the other hand, if you compare the numbers, which is great that we can actually compare same questionnaires, different professionals, and then you see the difference, and then you actually see that in academia it's higher than in the general working class with all different professions. Or if you compare it with nurses, for example, we did another study with nurses and doctors, which is also at lower rates of certain questionnaires that are questioning mental health. So, and even psychiatrists, we did another survey on them. And there you see also lower numbers than here, which is interesting. And that's something that we have to dive into. Is that an answer to your question? Yeah, but not an answer. Okay.
Andra Schromm, Research Center Borstel, Germany. I have a question regarding the impact of pressure. You said this will increase the risk of failure. I have a little bit different opinion about, so I would like you to comment between failure and lowering the threshold for conscious research integrity breaches. And my question would be, do you have any data or experience whether resilience training would be an option to answer this problem?
I
mean, this is what I try to.
Not yet. This is now that my voice. What changed? Nothing. Okay. I don't have the answer yet, but I won't tell you. We, together with in the Young Academy, we are currently preparing a big national survey on mental health, also psychological safety, working conditions, that we can actually answer this question. And one of the questionnaires that we included in this is about resilience. So that because our hypothesis is as well that the more resilient you are, the lower, and that's also reflected, comes back in other literature studies, of course, in patients, the better you're prepared, and the lower levels of mental health problems like depression and anxiety are there. So I don't have the answer yet, but in half year I will have an answer. And I hope we can connect to talk about it. Yeah.
All right. As the next session will be there in 2 minutes or so, There's
an online question.
Online, yes. Also 2 here, but in the interest of time, I guess we should get back to the main auditorium. No. Yeah.
I think. Yeah, there's a poster session after this,
right? Session, yes.
Yeah.
The poster session, right. But in respect for the people.
Let's, of course.
Join me in thanking all the speakers of this session again.